All right. A really important thing that we have to consider in the United States is the political and military consequences of oil imports, particularly from the Middle Eastern region of the world. As I said before, after World War II, the United States became a net importer of oil to meet our energy needs. And the bulk of that came from Middle Eastern countries, primarily Saudi Arabia, but also other Middle Eastern countries, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates are oil exporters of oil. So in a desire to control these oil resources, after World War II, the United States became a lot more involved in the Middle East. Primarily, we wanted to control the oil post-World War II during the Cold War with the Soviet Union. So let's talk a little bit about relationships between the U.S. and Middle Eastern oil exporting countries. And this will help you a lot with your first assignment, but I'm not going to take you all the way to the present. I'll let you do a little bit of research on your own. Okay. So if we look at a very, very brief history, prior to World War II, most U.S. presence, and this is not the U.S. government, this is just presence by any American entity in the Middle East, was missionary. So missionaries were trying to create educational institutions. The American University of Beirut is still in existence. Because of this, some other European countries were behaving in a more imperialistic manner. So the United States was viewed favorably. Some of the activity by U.S.-based oil companies, there was a little bit, but it was limited by French and British rivals. But if we fast forward to post-World War II, after World War II, Great Britain, France, other European countries were rebuilding from the devastation of the war. Except for the bombing of Pearl Harbor, none of World War II was fought on U.S. soil. So the United States was well poised because we weren't trying to rebuild a devastated nation. So the United States took advantage of a couple of things. The United States and the Soviet Union were allies during World War II in defeating Germany. But as soon as World War II ended and the partitioning of Germany began to happen, the United States and the Soviet Union, that had both risen considerably in global prominence during World War II and the years leading up to it, began to vie with each other for political control. So the United States, post-World War II, sought control of Middle Eastern oil because we wanted to use it as a strategic asset. It was a lever of geopolitical control. In other words, if the United States controlled Middle Eastern oil, we could help our Western European allies, France, Great Britain, rebuild from the war, and we could limit the industrial growth of the Soviet Union, thereby helping the United States be the dominant global superpower. So we saw it as a vital industrial resource. We could control the economic development, primarily of the Soviet Union, if we limited their access to Middle Eastern oil. It also provided huge profits for U.S. energy companies, for construction firms, and for arms producers. So after World War II, the United States became the dominant foreign power in the Middle East. And our influence there continues to this day. So U.S. government policy post-World War II, the State Department described the Middle East as a stupendous source of strategic power and one of the greatest material prizes in the world. President Eisenhower called it the most strategically important area of the world. So For all of these reasons, again, the United States became the dominant foreign power in the entire Middle Eastern region, and as we will see, we have subsequently meddled in the politics of many Middle Eastern countries. Okay, so we're going to start with what I call, oh, what a mess. In 1947, so after World War II, the United States replaced Great Britain as the dominant influence in the Middle East. In alignment with that, the United States also strongly supported the creation of Israel in the United Nations. And as we've seen, even in recent weeks here in May of 2021, the U.S. support of Israel in the Middle East is still a source of tension for the Palestinians and other countries that are aligned with the Palestinians. So the U.S. support of Israel, we're not going to talk about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but just in a non-biased discussion, we can say that it has created political tensions across that region. And again, the United States replaced Great Britain to prevent Soviet influence during the Cold War. Okay? So initially, the United States began growing closer to the country of Iran. Okay? Now, somewhere in here, post-World War II, the Organization of Oil Exporting Countries was formed. And you can look in the next lecture notes and find the exact year. One of the reasons for this is when U.S. and European oil companies began to explore and develop oil across the Middle East. They behaved in a very ethnocentric, condescending manner. And the oil companies were making deals with the affluent elites in these different countries, in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, and Iraq, across the region, so that U.S. and European oil companies were making huge profits from the oil in these countries, whereas most of the common citizens of these countries were still living in very desperate poverty. Well, eventually these countries, even the ruling elite, got tired of all of the profits going to oil companies who were operating in the Western world. So the primary reason OPEC was formed was to take control of oil prices and profits from the big oil companies and return that to the actual oil-producing companies or countries. So some of the founding members of OPEC, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, the Middle Eastern countries you would expect, but also Venezuela and Nigeria are both oil-producing countries. So a couple of things began to happen. In 1973, the United States supported Israel openly during the Yom Kippur War. Without U.S. support, Israel probably would have been destroyed in that war. Because of U.S. support, Israel survived and came out victorious. So the other Arabic countries across the Middle East who opposed the creation of Israel then imposed an oil embargo on the United States in 1973. And this oil embargo lasted for a good number of months. I remember as a child sitting in long gas lines in the United States waiting your turn to buy rationed gasoline. The price of gasoline also went up quite a bit, which was economically devastating for U.S. industry. So other impacts that U.S. involvement in the Middle East have had. In 1953, the United States, or as I said before, the United States, after World War II, started to align with Iran. And the Soviet Union had some influence in Iran, and the U.S. helped push the Soviet Union and its influence out of the country. However, Iran was a democracy. They had a democratically elected leader, and their democratically elected leader was looking to nationalize their oil because, again, the country was tired of U.S. and British oil companies making huge profits off of Iranian oil when the country wasn't making big profits. So what happened is in 1953, and the lecture notes have a lot more detail on this for you to read, but in 1953, a U.S. CIA operative working in conjunction with Great Britain helped to depose the democratically elected leader of Iran and replace it with a U.S.-friendly puppet government under the Shah of Iran. Clearly, this was of great concern, not just for Iran, who was now, no longer under self-rule, but under the rule of a U.S.-friendly puppet government that, of course, then gave United States-based oil companies concessions to about 40% of Iranian oil. Well, this concerned the rest of the oil-producing countries in the Middle East because they thought, well, if the United States and Great Britain can depose an elected leader in Iran and put their puppet government in place to control the oil, they could do that to any country in the Middle East. So countries like Iraq that bordered Iran were not really happy about the precedent that this set, and this, of course, alienated a lot of Iranians. Now, this situation continued with the United States having their puppet government under the Shah and exploiting Iranian oil reserves until 1979. And in 1979, there was an Islamic revolution in Iran that ousted the Shah and reestablished self-rule for the country under what you could only anticipate would be an anti-American regime. During this period of time, Reagan sent warships to protect Kuwait oil export from Iranians through the Persian Gulf, and during the Iran-Contra affair, and this was during the 80s, tried to reestablish relationships. You can read some more about that in the lecture notes. Did not go well. So, interestingly, after the Iranian Revolution, the United States fell out of favor with that country, so the United States began to align with Iraq instead and helped support the regime of Saddam Hussein and helped bring him to power. So all the way through the 1980s, there was about a decade-long war between Iran and Iraq. In many ways, it was a proxy war where the Soviet Union backed Iran, the United States backed Iraq, and again helped bring Saddam Hussein to power. So the United States formed some good relations with Iraq until the Iran-Iraq war ended, and Iraq needed money to help rebuild after this decade-long war. So Iraq invaded Kuwait to get control of Kuwait's oil fields. So at this point in time, then, Gulf War I was declared. Then President Bush, the elder President Bush, sent in U.S. troops to help defend Kuwait. So the tide in the United States then turned against Iraq and against Saddam Hussein, the leader we had helped bring to power in the 1980s. With the help of the United States, Iraq was expelled from Kuwait, but Saddam Hussein remained in power. Okay. All right. Okay. So separate from that event, there was the terrorist attacks on the United States in September of 2001. Interestingly, the majority of the terrorists who launched the 9/11 attacks on the United States were from Saudi Arabia. The United States did not retaliate against Saudi Arabia in any way, shape, or form. Why? We had always been on good relations with them because up until we started importing more oil from Canada, we were reliant on Saudi Arabia to meet our oil needs. Okay, so after 9/11, for reasons that will be debated for decades to come, the second President Bush, the son of the first one, declared a war on terror. Now, again, a lot of the 9/11 terrorists were Saudi Arabian by citizens, but the Al-Qaeda terrorist group that's responsible for the attack was based in Afghanistan. So the United States did invade Afghanistan, but the United States also invaded Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction. Again, very hotly debated topic. Historians will be discussing this for decades to come, but no weapons of mass destruction were ever found. What the United States did do is oust Saddam Hussein and install a U.S. friendly leader. So one could ask the question, we weren't democracy building because in Iran and Iraq, we ousted democratically elected leaders to put U.S. friendly puppet governments into place. The first President Bush supported going to war to help liberate Kuwait, and he said it was a form of democracy building. The only problem being is that Kuwait has never been a democracy. It is a monarchy with a very poor human rights record. One can say the same thing for Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a monarchy with a very poor human rights record, especially when it comes to the rights of its female citizens. So one can look at activities of United States in World War II, in Middle Eastern countries after World War II, saying, were we really interested in democracy building? The answer is no. Or were we looking to protect oil interest? Again, for your first assignment, you're going to get to create a timeline of U.S. activities in the Middle East. So this is hit on some of the high points. But if we think post 9/11, the United States launched, the second attack on Iraq, an invasion of Afghanistan, and there have been no end of U.S. activities in the Middle East since 9/11, mainly because the destabilization created when the United States invaded Iraq and ousted Saddam Hussein as the leader, created a leadership vacuum that led to a rise in global terrorism, and now the United States have been involved in Middle Eastern countries fighting this global terrorism. But I'll leave some of that to you for your first assignment. So, one of the things I always tell students when you take this class, there's a couple of things I want you to take away. The United States is not a well-liked country in the Middle East. Occasionally throughout our history of about the last 50 years, you've been able to turn on the evening news at different times, not every night, and see people in the streets of Tehran, the capital of Iran, burning the United States flag. There's reasons why that happened. After 9/11, a lot of people in the United States ran around saying, I don't understand why they hate us. Why does everyone hate us so much? And I thought, well, I can answer that question, but you're not going to want to hear the answer. But we need to know the answer. So what we need to know as Americans is after World War II, when the United States became the biggest, the most dominant foreign power in the Middle East, We did it to use the oil in that region as a strategic asset during the Cold War and subsequently. So some of the things that we've done, and you're going to get to read and talk about more in your first assignment. Okay? The United States, post-World War II, has supported corrupt and repressive regimes, not democracy, is opposing political or economic process in Middle Eastern countries, all because we want to control the oil resources of the region. Former leader of the CIA has said correctly that building democracy is not on the American agenda in the Middle East. Washington wants to support a range of dictators as long as they conform to U.S. foreign policy needs, okay, which is controlling Middle Eastern oil. So I will leave the rest of that assignment up for you guys to do a little bit of investigation in. I've given you some information on the website, and you can look up some more on your own and learn a lot more about U.S. activities in the Middle East since 9/11 and moving forward to the present, where up until about a year ago, then President Trump and Iran again were making some negative gestures towards each other over the Iran nuclear deal, and people were becoming a little bit concerned about U.S. war in the Middle East again. But I'll leave that to you guys. And in our next taped lecture, we will talk about coal resources and the United States.